In my hands, I am holding two watches. They are both the same brand, the same model, but there is about a 65-year gap between the two of them. I just barely picked up my first vintage watch. If you don't know by now, I love Omega. I love their watches, I love their design, I love the history. I have an Omega Seamaster that I got this year, and it is my absolute favorite watch that I have ever owned. But I don't really have any vintage watches. I have a watch from like the 1990s, 1980s maybe. It was my grandpa's old Seiko, and it currently does not run. And a while ago I just picked up a vintage Seiko from the 80s. So it's technically vintage, but it's quartz and it's a Seiko, and it's just not like too exciting. I wanted like a mechanical watch from a long time ago with some sort of like kind of name recognition, and I figured what perfect watch to buy then? A vintage Omega Seamaster. So this is a 1956 Omega Seamaster calendar with the Cal 503 in it. It's 20 jewels. I don't know how many hertz it is. It kind of looks like it could be like 2.5 or 3. It's really slow ticking, and then it tells you the time, and it has a date function. It is, I think, 14 karat. Don't quote me on it, but it's 14 karat rose gold plated. But stainless steel is like the main part of the case. I think they call it like gold filled back then. I got it for a little under $1,000, and I had it for a few days now, and vintage watches are kind of scary. When I first got the watch, I did what I do with every watch when I get it out, and I either kind of twist the watch around to get the rotor going, or I turn the crown to kind of wind it up, and I would do that, and the crown felt extremely stiff. Like as if there was like something blocking it or something in the way. And because this watch is from the 50s, it also doesn't wind as smooth as a new modern watch does. The other thing I heard is when I started wiggling it around, I couldn't hear the rotor, and it sounded kind of like the rotor had fallen off, and it was really clanky and loud, and just, I thought the watch was broken. I went ahead and I popped off the case back, because this is just a snap-on case back, and I looked at the movement, and when I was moving the rotor around, this little tiny thing came out of the movement. I don't know what it is, still to this day I don't know. I'm going to take this to my watchmaker at some point, but for the time being, the watch runs, it winds, the crown winds it, the rotor, you can't really hear, but the rotor winds it, the crown winds it, and as you can tell, it is currently running. I don't know much about the history of the Omega Seamaster. What I do know is that I believe in the 40s? I could be wrong on this, but it's sometime in the 40s, maybe the 50s, Omega made the Seamaster, which was a watch made for sea, land, and air. And essentially back then, it was a watch that you would wear to do everything. Kind of like how the modern Seamaster is now. This is, of course, professionally diving oriented, but you can still wear this anywhere you want. On my specific watch that I got, it has a very, very interesting old dial. It's a honeycomb dial, but it has a bunch of like little spots all over it, and I call it like an Oreo kind of color to it. It looks as if you took like an Oreo shake and you just mixed it up really, really, really good, and it gets to that point where it's like kind of that gray color. It looks a lot like that. The indices are also rose gold. The hands are rose gold. The second hand is like kind of brass looking and really dirty. And of course the date wheel, it's a date wheel. On the dial it has the Omega logo in what seems to be rose gold. Underneath it, it says Omega Automatic, and then just below the hands it says Seamaster Calendar. On the back side of the watch, it's kind of dented and not in great condition, but it's just a snap-on case back. No wording, no nothing. The crown is signed with the Omega logo, and the strap that it came on was just like a really cheap alligator strap, and when I was trying to put it on my wrist, the buckle fell off, and it was just a really shitty strap. And so I went ahead and I put on the strap from my old, that one Seiko that I had, because it's 18 millimeters and it fits, and this strap has been fine, and I think it looks good on this watch. This is my smallest watch that I have, if you're not including my Grogu watch, which I bought for just funny reasons. This is 34 millimeters, and on my 6.5 wrist, it feels small. It is small, but I love the size of this watch. I just love how small it is. Something about small watches that are old to me is something that's just cool. It has kind of a domed acrylic crystal, and it is very, very vintage looking as it kind of pops out of the dial and pops out of the case. And I've only owned this watch for 2 days now, And I'm kind of documenting this as like my very first vintage watch and my first experience with a vintage watch and kind of what it's like to own. Where I'm at right now, vintage watches just kind of scare me. I don't know what it can handle. I don't know what it can't handle. I know that it obviously I can't go swimming with it. And the rain, I feel like it would break if it got in because the crown doesn't even look like it's like fully closed at all. I don't know. Vintage just kind of scares me. But the fact that this was made in 1956, when where I am standing was just a big dirt field with nothing, no roads, that whole idea and just the whole kind of like vibiness of an old watch is really cool to me. It's kind of crazy comparing it to my new Seamaster. All the kind of technological changes that have happened from 50 years, 55 years of watchmaking, how this has turned into this and just the differences between them. I think that's kind of nuts. But yeah, this is my first vintage watch, my first vintage Omega. We're gonna have to see how the whole kind of experience is with owning this, but so far it has been kind of scary. But I think it works okay.